You're listening to SiliconEdge's Spotlight Interview Series. SiliconEdge is personalized innovation for your competitive edge. Innovate, communicate, transform at silicon-edge.com. Now, here's your host, James Santagata.
This is part one of a two-part program entitled How to Easily Attract, Acquire, and Stop Overpaying for Truly Top Talent. Now, a great deal has been written and said about the difficulties companies face in finding, attracting, and acquiring top talent. And yet, even when companies are able to accomplish this, they still often find themselves overpaying for this talent in terms of both the compensation package extended and the time and effort expended to find and close the desired candidate or candidates. And if that isn't reason enough to rethink the entire talent acquisition process, we really should be honest and acknowledge that the entire process often takes far too long, and along the way introduces a number of possibly very expensive opportunity costs. What does this mean? Why does that happen? Well, for starters, while we've all heard so much about this so-called war for talent and how important top talent is to the bottom line or the bottom line success of a firm or organization, the reality, the brutal reality is that many, if not most companies and their employees, although often beknownst to themselves, are actively engaged not on a war for talent, but instead they're engaged in a de facto war on talent. Now that bears repeating. A war on talent, not a war for talent. A very simple change of preposition, completely different meaning. Now, in these cases, they're actively and quite successfully, I might add, doing things such as chasing away the top talent they so desperately need and desire. In some cases, they're doing it by chasing away the top talent from not even having them apply. They'll just pass the firm up. In other cases, they're chasing away the top talent from continuing on after the first interview. Top talent ejects. In still other cases, we find that the companies that have a war on talent are extremely effective in filtering out the top talent during the initial resume screening process. That's right, they're extremely effective in cutting out, culling, booting to the curb, liquidating, eliminating the top talent during the resume review or screening process. And really, if that isn't enough, in other cases, they're really simply drop kicking the best candidates to the curb after the first or second interview. How fast this occurs most often depends on how soon it becomes evident to the hiring company or the manager or the future peers the talent is hot at hand. What does that mean? Yes, when the talent is hot, that's when this most likely occurs. James, what are you blabbering on about? What do you mean companies are blocking and booting top talent to the curb? Why would they do that? Why? For top talent, and how can you say they're overpaying? Well, you asked. Let's take a quick look. Let's first listen to this message, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the second segment of part one. Now, we asked about what was I blabbering on about the war on talent not being a war for talent. Look, it's really no secret that companies often spend large or extremely large sums of money trying to recruit and acquire what they consider to be the top talent on the market and in the market. And let's define those. On the market is talent which is immediately accessible or looking for a position. In the market is the total market. They might be happily employed and not looking, and they're in the market. So they could, sometimes people might use other terms which come at a little different angle, like passive or an active candidate, but let's say on the market or in the market. Now, it would behoove us to remember that the total cost to successfully hire one candidate accrues not only from the direct expenses paid to advertise the open position, but it also comes from the often steep fees, steep from the perspective of the hiring company. I've never heard a hiring firm say that a recruiting agencies or third-party agency fees were too low, and I've never really heard an agency say their fees they charge are too high. So this is really coming from the perspective of the hiring firm. Now, these fees may be, depending on the region, as low as 15 to 20% of the new hire's first-year salary in places such as the U.S., North America. However, the fees can range much higher, as much as 30 to 35% in places such as Japan. And in some cases, there's accelerators taking those fees up to 50%. 50%. Now, even with fees of 15 to 20%, it can be painful. This is especially the case when annual salaries are running 100,000 US, 120,000 US, or even 150 or more. And we know this is the case in many industries. One must also determine the volume of positions to be filled, not just for new positions, but for existing positions. And that's dictated by the churn rate or conversely the retention rate. Now, it really doesn't or shouldn't take a financial genius to realize that these expenses do and add up rather quickly. We also need to consider how much time and energy is spent bringing in each of these candidates for an interview. And by the way, if you aren't paying fees to a third-party agency, you're most likely relying on your own in-house recruiters. So again, you need to fully burden their compensation packages and costs. Salary, bonuses, healthcare expenses, HR, management, compliance fees. The employer's half of the FICA insurance, the processing and facilities, desk, telephone, computer, help desks, and so on. We also need to consider the time and energy spent by the HR department as well as the hiring manager. I would also suggest including, and this is a big one, including the interviewee's future peers who are often asked to participate or are required to participate in often what are lengthy interviews or lengthy interview process. Now, the very act of interviewing external candidates can quickly chew up a huge amount of time of an employee's valuable time. It also reduces their productivity, especially depending on their job. This comes from the increased stress of trying to recover from a distraction or shifting in a different gear. You may be a programmer or a finance person working on a large problem you need to kind of pack up again and move into. Many different factors. But that all can come from participating in these interviews. And it also takes away from the interviewer's already hectic and fully packed work schedule. This is not to say it's not valuable. In fact, this is critical to both their job and the company. For the company, the department, and the team members. But what it does mean is that we need to take into account all of these costs and who pays them. And the costs are associated not just with recruiting or the talent acquisition process, but also the talent acquisition process we've chosen or that we've been gifted. This ends the second segment of part one. We'll be back for part two of this segment of how to easily attract, acquire, and stop overpaying for top talent.